The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the kitchen counter as I worked on quarterly reports for my consulting firm. It was 11:47 p.m., and the house was perfectly quiet. Our 8-year-old son, Dylan, had been asleep for hours, and I was finally catching up on deadlines that had been haunting me all week. The familiar sounds of our neighborhood in Riverside Heights filled the silence: distant traffic on Maple Avenue, the gentle hum of our refrigerator, and the occasional rustle of autumn leaves against our windows. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. Late-night texts were usually spam or work emergencies that could wait until morning. But something made me glance at the screen, and when I saw the sender, my heart skipped a beat. Urgent. Take Dylan and leave the house now. Don't pack anything. Drive to your sister's in Portland immediately. Do not call me back. I love you both. J. The message was from my husband, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, who had been deployed on a classified CIA operation somewhere in Eastern Europe for the past 6 weeks. James never, and I mean never, contacted me during active missions unless it was a scheduled check-in through secure military channels. Personal phones were strictly forbidden in his line of work. I stared at the message, reading it again and again, my hands beginning to tremble. James was methodical, careful, and absolutely never dramatic. If he was breaking protocol to send this text, something was catastrophically wrong. I tried calling him immediately. The call went straight to a disconnected number message. My stomach dropped. Another text came through: trust no one from the agency who contacts you. Not even Director Harrison. They think I'm dead, but I'm not. Go now. Director Harrison was James's direct supervisor at Langley, a man who had been to our home for barbecues, who had played catch with Dylan in our backyard, who had given the toast at our 10th wedding anniversary party just 4 months ago. The idea that I couldn't trust him made no sense. But the urgency in James's messages was unmistakable. I ran upstairs, my mind racing. Dylan was sleeping peacefully in his Spider-Man pajamas, his favorite stuffed elephant tucked under his arm. How do you wake up an 8-year-old at midnight and tell them you have to flee your home without explanation? How do you explain that Daddy, who they think is on a business trip, might be in mortal danger? Dylan, sweetheart, I whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. We need to take a surprise trip to Aunt Rachel's house. He stirred, confused and sleepy. Right now, Mom? It's dark outside. I know, baby. But Daddy asked us to go visit her. It'll be fun, like an adventure. Something in my voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation because Dylan sat up, suddenly more alert. Is Daddy okay? Daddy's fine, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was lying. He just wants us to be safe while he finishes his work. As we hurriedly gathered a few essential items, clothes for a couple of days, Dylan's medications, some snacks for the road, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Agent Mills from CIA Internal Security. We understand you may have received concerning communications tonight. For your safety and your son's, please remain at your residence. We're sending a protection detail to you immediately. My blood turned to ice. James had specifically warned me not to trust anyone from the agency. But how did they know about the text so quickly? How were they monitoring our communications? I grabbed Dylan's hand and headed for the garage, my mind spinning. Through our kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of headlights turning onto our street, moving slowly, deliberately, like they were searching for something. Mom, you're scaring me, Dylan whispered as I buckled him into his car seat. Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. We're just going to drive to Aunt Rachel's house in Portland, and tomorrow this will all make sense. As I started the engine, I saw the black SUV pull up in front of our house. 2 men in dark suits got out, and one of them spoke into what looked like a radio. They weren't behaving like a protection detail, they were behaving like hunters who had just found their prey's den empty. I backed out of our garage as quietly as possible, headlights off, praying they hadn't heard the engine. Once we reached the end of our street, I turned on the lights and pressed the accelerator. In my rearview mirror, I watched our home, the place where Dylan had taken his first steps, where James and I had shared countless quiet mornings over coffee, where we had built what I thought was a secure, happy life, disappear into the darkness. As we merged onto Interstate 84 heading toward Portland, Dylan fell asleep again, exhausted by the late hour and the strange circumstances. But I was wide awake, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind flooded with questions that had no answers. What had James discovered that was so dangerous? Why were people he trusted now hunting for us? And most terrifying of all, if a CIA operative with James's experience and training was afraid for our lives, what kind of enemy were we running from? The highway stretched out ahead of us, dark and endless, leading us away from everything we knew and toward an uncertain future that I could never have imagined when I woke up that morning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive to Portland should have taken 4 hours, but I took every back road I could remember from childhood trips with my parents. Dylan stirred occasionally in his car seat, mumbling questions about why we were driving in the dark, but exhaustion kept pulling him back to sleep. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror made my pulse spike. Every rest stop felt like a potential trap. By the time we reached the outskirts of Portland, dawn was breaking across the Columbia River, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks that seemed impossibly peaceful given our circumstances. My sister Rachel lived in a modest craftsman house in the Hawthorne district. She was 5 years older than me, a divorced nurse who worked night shifts at OHSU hospital. I prayed she'd be home and not at work as I pulled into her gravel driveway. The porch light was still on, which meant she hadn't left for her shift yet. I gently shook Dylan awake. "We're here, sweetheart. Remember Aunt Rachel's house?" He rubbed his eyes and looked around, confused. "Why didn't we call first? Daddy always says we should call before visiting people." Out of the mouths of babes. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that calling ahead might have gotten us killed? Rachel opened the front door before we even reached the porch, her curly red hair wild from sleep, wearing the oversized OHSU t-shirt she used as pajamas. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know about the seriousness of our situation. "Coffee first, explanations second," she said, ushering us inside. "Dylan, honey, there are leftover pancakes in the fridge if you're hungry." While Dylan settled in front of Rachel's television with cartoons and breakfast, I showed her James's texts. Her face grew pale as she read them. "Abby, this is insane. James deals with international terrorism, weapons trafficking, things that happen in other countries. Why would CIA people be hunting you here in Oregon?" "I don't know," I whispered, sinking into her familiar kitchen chair. "But I saw those men at our house. They weren't there to protect us." Rachel poured coffee with hands that shook slightly. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Your husband discovered something he wasn't supposed to see. If you want him to live, check your email. Come alone to the coordinates we'll send. You have 24 hours. My blood turned cold. "They have him." Rachel read over my shoulder. "Or they want you to think they do." I opened my email on my phone, and there was a message from an encrypted address with no subject line. Inside was a single attachment, a video file. I clicked play with trembling fingers. The video showed a dimly lit room that looked like an abandoned warehouse. James sat tied to a chair, his face bruised, his CIA uniform torn. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in a voice that was unmistakably his, though strained with pain. "Abby, if you're seeing this, they found out about the Blackstone files. Don't trust the agency response team. There's a mole inside Langley feeding information to a private military contractor called Titan Defense. They're selling classified mission intel to the highest bidders, including enemy governments." The camera moved closer to his face. I copied everything to a secure drive before they took me. It's hidden in Dylan's room, inside the false bottom of his toy chest, the one my father built. The password is your mother's maiden name plus Dylan's birth year. The video cut to black, then a new voice spoke, electronically disguised but clearly threatening. Beacon Hill Park, Seattle. The old observatory. Midnight tonight. Come alone, or your husband dies. I stared at the phone screen, my heart hammering. James had mentioned Titan Defense before, a company started by former military officers who provided security consulting to corporations and foreign governments. He'd always been suspicious of their methods, but I never imagined they had infiltrated the CIA itself. Rachel gripped my shoulder. Abby, you can't go to Seattle. This is obviously a trap. But what if they really have him? What if he's still alive? Then you call the FBI, the police, someone who isn't compromised. I thought about James's warning about trusting no one from the agency. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many people in law enforcement might be working with Titan Defense? I need to get that drive first, I said finally. If James risked everything to get those files, they must be important enough to save his life. Rachel shook her head. You're not going back to that house. I have to. It's the only way to get James back. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. But I'm coming with you. And Dylan stays here with Mrs. Chen next door. She's used to watching kids on short notice. 2 hours later, we were driving back toward Riverside Heights. Rachel had called in sick to work and borrowed her neighbor's Honda Civic, reasoning that my car might be recognizable. As we approached our neighborhood, my stomach churned with anxiety. The black SUVs were gone, but I could see yellow tape across our front door and a Portland police car parked across the street. Whatever story Titan Defense had fed to local law enforcement, they'd made our house into a crime scene. We'll have to go through the back, I whispered as we parked 3 blocks away. The fence between our yard and the Johnsons has a loose board that Dylan uses to sneak between properties. Rachel squeezed my hand. If we get caught, we tell them we're here to get clothes and medicine for Dylan. Nothing about spy drives or conspiracy theories. We crept through the neighborhood like teenagers breaking curfew, using hedges and fences for cover. When we reached the loose fence board, I realized how surreal this was, sneaking into my own home to retrieve evidence that my husband had hidden from his own employer. The back door key was still under the ceramic frog where we'd always kept it. Inside, the house felt violated. Drawers had been pulled out, couch cushions overturned, picture frames removed from walls. They'd searched every inch. But apparently, they hadn't thought to check an 8-year-old's toy chest. I climbed the stairs to Dylan's room, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. His room had been ransacked like the rest of the house, but the wooden toy chest sat in its usual spot by the window. James's father had built it when Dylan was born, solid oak with brass hinges and a secret compartment that even I had forgotten about. I felt along the bottom edge until my fingers found the hidden release. The false bottom clicked open, revealing a space just large enough for a small external hard drive wrapped in a plastic bag. Inside the bag was also a note in James's handwriting. If something happens to me, give this to Agent Sarah Collins at FBI Portland. She's clean. Trust her. As I slipped the drive and note into my jacket pocket, Rachel hissed from downstairs, Abby. Car in the driveway. I peered through Dylan's bedroom window and saw a black sedan pulling up behind the police car. 2 men in suits got out, not local police, but federal agents. We were trapped. Get to the basement, I whispered urgently to Rachel as I heard car doors slam outside. There's a crawl space that connects to the neighbor's foundation. We crept down the stairs, avoiding the spots that creaked. Through the front window, I could see the agents examining the police tape, speaking into radios. One of them gestured toward the house while the other walked the perimeter. In the basement, I led Rachel to a narrow opening behind our water heater that James had shown me years ago when we'd had foundation work done. Emergency exit, he'd called it then, laughing. You never know when you might need an alternate route. Now I understood he hadn't been joking. We crawled through dusty insulation and concrete until we emerged in the Johnsons' basement. Their house sat empty. They were snowbirds who spent winters in Arizona. I knew they kept a spare key under their garden gnome, another small-town habit that suddenly felt like salvation. 20 minutes later, we were driving away in Rachel's borrowed Honda, my jacket pocket heavy with the drive that might save James's life or end ours. That was too close, Rachel breathed, checking her mirrors obsessively. Those weren't local police, were they? No. Federal agents. Probably CIA or NSA. I pulled out the note James had hidden with the drive. He says there's an FBI agent in Portland we can trust. Agent Sarah Collins. Rachel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. How do you know this Collins person isn't part of whatever conspiracy James uncovered? It was a valid question. James had warned me to trust no one from the agency, but he'd specifically mentioned Collins as clean. Either she was genuinely trustworthy, or this was another layer of the trap. We need to see what's on this drive first, I decided. Before we contact anyone. We stopped at a public library in Beaverton, far enough from our neighborhood to feel safe. I plugged the drive into one of their public computers, my hands shaking as I entered the password, Morrison 2016, my mother's maiden name plus Dylan's birth year. The drive contained dozens of files, classified mission reports, financial records, encrypted communications, and video surveillance footage. As I scrolled through them, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Titan Defense hadn't just infiltrated the CIA, they were actively selling intelligence to hostile foreign governments. Russian agents had detailed information about CIA safe houses in Eastern Europe. Chinese operatives knew the identities of American assets in Beijing. North Korean intelligence had obtained satellite surveillance data of U.S. military bases. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between Titan Defense CEO Marcus Thornfield and someone identified only as Raven, clearly a code name for their mole inside Langley. One email made my blood run cold: Patterson getting too close to the Blackstone operation. Recommend immediate extraction and permanent solution. He has family, wife and child, that could be used as leverage if containment fails. They'd been planning to use Dylan and me as weapons against James. Another file contained bank records showing payments from Titan Defense to offshore accounts controlled by several high-ranking CIA officials. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars in exchange for classified information that had undoubtedly gotten American agents killed. The most recent email was timestamped just 2 days ago, package delivered to Europe. Client satisfied. Patterson secured for cleanup. Begin family extraction protocol. Package delivered to Europe, that had to be referring to James. And family extraction protocol meant they were planning to take Dylan and me as well. Rachel read over my shoulder, her face growing pale. Abby, this is massive. This isn't just about James anymore. This is treason on a scale that could compromise national security for years. I copied everything to a separate flash drive, paranoid about keeping backups. As I worked, a new email notification popped up on my phone. The encrypted sender again. You have 18 hours. Change of location, Mount Hood National Forest, Timberline Lodge parking lot. 6 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone with all copies of stolen materials, or your husband dies and your son becomes an orphan. The threat against Dylan hit me like a physical blow. These people had already demonstrated they were willing to kill CIA agents and sell out their own country. Threatening a child meant nothing to them. But the location change bothered me. Why move from Seattle to Mount Hood? Unless. I opened Google Maps and studied the route. Mount Hood was closer to Portland, but it was also more isolated. Fewer witnesses, more places to dispose of bodies. This felt like they were setting up for a final confrontation where they eliminated all loose ends. They're planning to kill all of us, I said quietly. Even if I bring them the drive, they can't let us live. We know too much. Rachel stared at the screen showing bank transfers worth millions. Then we contact this FBI agent. What choice do we have? I thought about James's note again. Agent Sarah Collins. He'd trusted her enough to put her name on paper, which meant either she was genuinely clean or he'd been deceived as well. The library computer showed Agent Collins worked out of the FBI Portland field office. Her official bio listed her specialties as counterintelligence and domestic terrorism. She'd been with the Bureau for 12 years, decorated for her work on several high-profile cases involving foreign espionage. We call her, I decided. But not from here. And not from our phones. If they're monitoring communications, we need a clean line. We drove to a gas station and used the payphone, an ancient relic that suddenly felt like the most secure communication device in the world. FBI Portland, Agent Collins speaking. Her voice was crisp, professional, but not unfriendly. I took a deep breath. Agent Collins, my name is Abigail Patterson. My husband is CIA Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, and I believe he's been taken by people inside the agency itself. A pause. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to need you to come in immediately. Where are you now? I can't do that. James warned me that there's a mole inside the CIA feeding information to a private military contractor. I have evidence, but I need to know you're not compromised before I trust you with it. Another pause, longer this time. When Collins spoke again, her voice had changed, less official, more urgent. Mrs. Patterson, your husband contacted me 3 weeks ago with concerns about irregularities in mission intelligence. We've been conducting a parallel investigation. If you have evidence related to the Blackstone operation, you're in serious danger. My heart pounded. She knew about Blackstone. Either James had already trusted her with some information, or this was an elaborate trap. How do I know you're not working with them? Because, Mrs. Patterson, they tried to kill me yesterday. The line went quiet except for the sound of traffic passing the gas station. Agent Collins? I'm here. Listen carefully. There's a safe house in Oregon City, 1247 Maple Street. It's off the books, not even the Bureau knows about it. Meet me there in 2 hours. Come alone, but bring whatever evidence you have. If your husband is still alive, this might be our only chance to save him. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the dead phone, weighing my options. Trust an FBI agent I'd never met, or try to handle this alone with a deadline that was rapidly approaching. In the distance, Mount Hood loomed against the cloudy sky, its peak shrouded in mist. Somewhere, James was counting on me to make the right choice. But as I climbed back into Rachel's car, I couldn't shake the feeling that every decision I made was pulling us deeper into a web that had been spinning around our family for months. The safe house on Maple Street looked like every other modest ranch home in Oregon City, beige siding, small front yard, nothing that would attract attention. But as I parked across the street, I noticed details that marked it as something more: reinforced door frames, windows with security film, and what looked like surveillance cameras disguised as outdoor lighting. Rachel had insisted on coming despite my protests. I'm not letting you walk into another trap alone, she'd said firmly. Besides, someone needs to stay with the car in case we need to leave quickly. I approached the front door with the flash drive burning like a coal in my pocket. Before I could knock, the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 30s with short blonde hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore jeans and a FBI windbreaker, and I could see the outline of a shoulder holster beneath it. Mrs. Patterson? I'm Agent Sarah Collins. Thank you for coming. She stepped aside to let me enter, her eyes scanning the street behind me. The interior of the house was sparse but functional: basic furniture, blackout curtains, and electronic equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything a suburban home should contain. Your husband spoke highly of you, Collins said, gesturing for me to sit at a small kitchen table. He said you were one of the smartest analysts he'd ever worked with during your Navy intelligence days. The comment caught me off guard. James rarely talked about my military background, especially to colleagues. He told you about my service record? He told me you'd recognize a setup when you saw one. He also said if anything happened to him, you'd be the one person capable of putting the pieces together. Collins sat across from me, her expression serious. Mrs. Patterson, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. 3 months ago, your husband came to me with suspicions about irregularities in CIA mission planning. Assets were being compromised, safe houses were being discovered, and mission intelligence was somehow reaching hostile parties. I pulled out the flash drive and set it on the table between us. He found proof. Collins's eyes widened as she looked at the device. You actually have it. The Blackstone files. You know about Blackstone? It's the code name James gave to the investigation. He'd been tracking financial discrepancies in classified contract payments for months. He suspected someone inside Langley was selling information to Titan Defense, but he needed hard evidence before he could make accusations against senior officials. I told her about everything that had happened since James's first text, the escape from our house, the agents searching our home, the video of James being held captive, and the ultimatum about meeting at Mount Hood. Collins listened without interruption, taking notes on a pad that she kept angled away from any potential surveillance devices. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Patterson, your husband isn't just fighting a rogue contractor. He's exposed a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of the intelligence community. The mole he discovered isn't some mid-level analyst, it's Deputy Director Charles Hawthorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. Hawthorne was James's mentor, the man who had recruited him into the CIA 15 years ago. He'd been at our wedding, had held Dylan as a baby, had been like an uncle to our family. That's impossible, I whispered. Charles has been with the agency for 30 years. He's devoted his life to national security. And used that position to sell out American agents for millions of dollars. Collins opened a folder and spread out photographs across the table. These were taken 3 days ago in Geneva. Hawthorne meeting with Alexei Petrov, a known Russian intelligence operative. The photos showed Charles Hawthorne, unmistakably, shaking hands with a man in an expensive coat outside what looked like a Swiss bank. Other images showed them exchanging briefcases, reviewing documents, and walking together along Lake Geneva like old friends. The bank records on your husband's drive confirm that Hawthorne has received over $12 million in payments from Titan Defense over the past 2 years. In exchange, he's provided classified mission data that has compromised at least 30 CIA operations and gotten 14 American agents killed. My hands shook as I stared at the photos. But why would Charles do this? Money? Money, yes, but also ideology. We believe Hawthorne has become convinced that American intelligence operations are destabilizing global politics. He sees himself as a peacemaker, selling information to balance power between superpowers. In his mind, he's preventing wars by ensuring that no single nation has too much of an intelligence advantage. The rationalization was so twisted it made me sick. And James discovered this? Your husband found the financial trail that connected Titan Defense to shell companies controlled by Russian and Chinese intelligence services. But more importantly, he discovered that Hawthorne was planning something much bigger than selling routine intelligence. Collins pulled out another document, a mission briefing marked with the highest classification levels. Operation Nightfall. A joint CNSA mission to eliminate a terrorist cell planning attacks on American soil. But according to the intelligence your husband gathered, Hawthorne has fed the complete mission plan to the terrorists themselves. They're not planning to stop the attacks, they're planning to ensure they succeed. The room seemed to spin around me. When? Tomorrow night. The same time you're supposed to meet at Mount Hood. It's not a coincidence, Mrs. Patterson. They're using you as a distraction while the real operation unfolds in Portland. I thought about Dylan, safe at Rachel's neighbor's house, unaware that people were planning mass casualties in his city. What kind of attack? Chemical weapons targeting the Portland International Airport and the convention center during a major technology conference. Thousands of people will be killed, and the evidence will point to foreign terrorists acting independently. But in reality, it's Hawthorne and Titan Defense creating a crisis they can profit from. Collins leaned forward. Your husband discovered this plan and was preparing to expose it when they captured him. The meeting at Mount Hood isn't about getting him back, it's about silencing the only people who know the truth. Then why not just kill us immediately? Why the elaborate charade? Because they need to recover every copy of the evidence before they act. If even one file surfaces after the attack, it could unravel everything. They're hoping to get you to Mount Hood with all the data, eliminate you there, and proceed with Nightfall knowing that no one can stop them. I stared at the flash drive sitting between us. Such a small object to hold such massive consequences. Agent Collins, there's something else. They specifically threatened my son. They know where he is. Her expression hardened. Then we need to move him immediately. And we need to contact the FBI's counterterrorism unit about nightfall. But first. She paused, studying my face. Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Are you willing to help us stop this, even if it means putting yourself in danger? I thought about James, somewhere in captivity, probably being tortured for information he'd already passed to me. I thought about Dylan, innocent and trusting, growing up in a world where his father's colleagues could betray everything they'd sworn to protect. I thought about the thousands of people who would die tomorrow if we did nothing. What do you need me to do? Collins smiled grimly. We're going to Mount Hood. But not the way they expect. Outside, Rachel sat in the car, nervously checking her mirrors. She had no idea that in the next 24 hours, her sister would either help prevent a terrorist attack or die trying. But as Collins began explaining her plan, I realized that James had been right about one thing. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who shares your flag. Collins pulled up a digital map on her laptop, marking locations across the Portland metropolitan area. The beauty of Hawthorne's plan is its simplicity. Create chaos, profit from the response, and eliminate anyone who could expose the truth. But every plan has weaknesses. She pointed to Mount Hood on the screen. They chose this location because it's isolated and controllable. One road in, one road out, plenty of places to dispose of evidence. But that isolation works both ways. If we can turn their trap against them, we can capture the entire conspiracy in one operation. I studied the terrain around Timberline Lodge. How many people are we talking about? Based on your husband's intelligence, probably a dozen operatives. Mix of Titan defense contractors and corrupted CIA personnel. They'll have the area secured hours before the meeting, with sniper positions and escape routes mapped out. And you want me to walk into the middle of that? Collins shook her head. I want you to appear to walk into it. The FBI's hostage rescue team will be positioned around the mountain starting at dawn. When you make contact with the kidnappers, we'll have them surrounded. It sounded reasonable in theory, but I'd learned enough about James's work to know that theory and reality rarely aligned in the field. What about James? If shooting starts, he'll be the first casualty. That's why we need to locate him before the exchange. Intelligence suggests they're holding him somewhere near government camp, probably in one of the abandoned Forest Service buildings. We'll have teams searching all night. I thought about the timeline. Less than 18 hours to find James, position FBI assets, and prevent a terrorist attack that would kill thousands. What if we're wrong about the airport attack? What if that's misinformation? Then thousands of people live through tomorrow, and we've only risked a few FBI agents instead of an entire city. Collins's expression was grim. But Mrs. Patterson, your husband's intelligence has been accurate on everything else. I don't think he's wrong about this. She opened another file on her laptop, showing surveillance photos of the Portland Airport and Convention Center. Titan Defense has had security contracts at both locations for the past 6 months. Their people have access to ventilation systems, emergency protocols, and evacuation routes. If they wanted to deploy chemical weapons, they've had time to position everything perfectly. The scope of the planning was staggering. How long has this been in development? Defense classified information about domestic terrorism threats, helping them position themselves for lucrative security contracts. But somewhere along the way, they decided that creating threats was more profitable than preventing them. Collins pulled up a spreadsheet showing Titan Defense's revenue growth. After every major terrorist incident or security breach in the past 2 years, their government contracts have increased exponentially. They've made hundreds of millions by being in the right place at the right time to offer solutions. And now they're manufacturing their own crisis. Exactly. Tomorrow's attack will create panic, justify massive increases in domestic security spending, and position Titan Defense as the premier contractor for protecting American infrastructure. They'll make billions while positioning themselves as heroes. The phone on Collins's table rang with an encrypted tone. She answered immediately. Collins. When? Are you certain? Understood. She hung up and turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. Mrs. Patterson, there's been a development. Surveillance teams have identified unusual activity at the airport. Chemical detection equipment is showing trace readings consistent with nerve agents in Terminal C. My blood turned cold. They're moving early. It appears so. The attack might be tonight, not tomorrow. We need to accelerate everything. Collins stood and began gathering equipment from around the safe house: body armor, communications gear, and weapons that looked far more serious than standard FBI issue. What does this mean for the Mount Hood meeting? It means it was never about recovering the evidence. It was always about keeping us distracted while they executed the real operation. Collins strapped on her tactical vest. Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you to do something that goes against every instinct you have as a mother and wife. I already knew what she was going to say, but I let her speak. I need you to go to Mount Hood as planned. Not to exchange evidence or negotiate for your husband's release, but to keep their attention focused away from Portland while we try to prevent thousands of deaths. The weight of the choice settled on me like lead. Risk my life and possibly James's to save strangers, or try to protect my family while a city burned. If I don't show up, they'll know something's wrong. They might accelerate the timeline even more. That's our assessment. Your presence at Mount Hood might be the only thing keeping them from triggering the attack immediately. I thought about Dylan, asleep at Mrs. Chen's house, trusting that his mother would make the right choices. I thought about James, wherever he was being held, probably knowing that his sacrifice might prevent something much worse. Agent Collins, if I do this, if I go to Mount Hood knowing it's a trap, what guarantee do I have that you'll find James? That this isn't just trading his life for the lives of strangers? Collins met my eyes directly. None. I can't guarantee anything except that if we do nothing, everyone dies. Your husband, you, your son, and thousands of innocent people in Portland. She paused, checking her sidearm. But Mrs. Patterson, your husband knew this choice was coming. The evidence he gathered, the risks he took, he knew it might come down to sacrificing himself to prevent something worse. He made his choice when he decided to investigate Hawthorne. The truth of that statement hit me hard. James had known from the beginning that exposing this conspiracy might cost him everything. He'd gathered the evidence anyway because he understood that some things were worth dying for. How will you know if the airport attack is imminent? We have chemical detection equipment being deployed as we speak, and bomb squads are conducting routine inspections of both target locations. If we find devices, we'll know the attack is active. Collins handed me a small communication device that looked like a hearing aid. This will keep us in contact throughout the operation. If we locate your husband, you'll be the first to know. If we stop the attack, we can move immediately to extract you from Mount Hood. I took the device, its weight barely noticeable but its significance enormous. And if something goes wrong? Then you follow your husband's example. You do what's right, regardless of the cost. Outside, Rachel waited in the car, checking her phone nervously. I would have to convince her to take Dylan and leave Portland immediately, without being able to explain why. Another impossible choice in a day full of them. As Collins loaded equipment into an FBI vehicle, she turned back to me one last time. Mrs. Patterson, your husband told me something 3 weeks ago that I didn't understand then. He said that honor wasn't about following orders or protecting institutions, it was about protecting the people those institutions were supposed to serve. I think he was preparing for this moment. I nodded, unable to speak around the tightness in my throat. He also said that if anything happened to him, you would know what to do. Not because you were trained for it, but because you shared his sense of right and wrong. As I walked back to Rachel's car, I realized that everything in my life had led to this moment. The Navy intelligence training that taught me to read between the lines. The years as a CIA wife that showed me how dedication and sacrifice looked in practice. The simple act of raising a child in a dangerous world and wanting to leave it better than we found it. In 6 hours, I would drive to Mount Hood, knowing it was probably a death sentence. But first, I had to convince my sister to leave town with my son, and somehow find the courage to risk everything for people I would never meet. As we drove away from the safe house, I caught a glimpse of Mount Hood in the distance, its peak hidden in clouds that looked like smoke against the darkening sky. The conversation with Rachel was the hardest thing I'd ever done. We sat in her kitchen while Dylan played with Legos in the living room, his innocent laughter a stark contrast to the gravity of what I had to say. "You need to take Dylan and leave Portland tonight," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. "Drive to Mom's place in Spokane. Don't stop, don't call anyone, just go." Rachel's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. "Abby, what are you talking about? We just got back." "I can't explain everything, but there's going to be trouble in the city. Serious trouble. Dylan needs to be as far away as possible." "What kind of trouble? And where will you be?" I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive back, but the words still felt like broken glass in my throat. "I have to meet with the people who have James. It's the only way to get him back." Rachel set down her mug with shaking hands. "The people who threatened to kill him? Abby, you can't seriously be considering this." "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. Call the police, call the FBI, call someone who actually knows how to handle this." If only she knew that the FBI was already involved, and that her sister was about to become bait in a trap that might save thousands of lives or end in disaster. "Rachel, please. I need you to trust me on this. Take Dylan to Mom's house and don't come back to Portland until I call you." She studied my face, and I could see the moment she realized I wasn't going to change my mind. Her expression shifted from anger to fear to resignation. "You're not coming with us, are you?" I shook my head. "And you think you might not, that this might be?" "I think I have to try to save my husband. And I think Dylan deserves to grow up with at least one parent." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Abby, you can't ask me to explain to that little boy why his mother decided to get herself killed. If this goes wrong, tell him that his parents loved him enough to fight for the kind of world where he could grow up safe. Tell him that sometimes adults have to make hard choices to protect the people they love." Before Rachel could respond, Dylan appeared in the doorway, holding a Lego spaceship. "Mom, look what I built. It has escape pods like in the movies." I knelt down and admired his creation, marveling at his 8-year-old imagination that could turn plastic blocks into vehicles of salvation. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so creative. Where's Daddy? Is he coming to see it?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Daddy's still working, but he would love it. Maybe you can show it to him when he gets back." Dylan nodded seriously. "Aunt Rachel says we might visit Grandma. Will you come too?" "Not right away, baby. But I want you to go with Aunt Rachel and have fun with Grandma, okay? And I want you to be really brave while I'm finishing some important work." He hugged me tightly, and I memorized the feeling of his small arms around my neck, the smell of his shampoo, the way he still felt small enough to protect from the world's dangers. "I love you, Dylan. More than all the stars in the sky." "I love you too, Mom. Will you call me?" "Every day," I promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. After they left, I sat alone in Rachel's house as darkness fell over Portland. The communication device Collins had given me remained silent, which I hoped meant the airport sweep hadn't found any immediate threats. At 8 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Agent Mills. We spoke earlier about your safety." The voice was different from the man who had called the night before, but the tone was equally official and equally false. "We understand you've been in contact with FBI personnel. For your husband's safety, we need you to discontinue that contact immediately." "Where is my husband?" "Your husband is secure. However, his continued well-being depends on your cooperation. The meeting location has changed again. Interstate 84, milepost 47, the rest area overlooking the Columbia River. Come alone at midnight." Another location change. They were clearly nervous about FBI surveillance, moving the meeting to increasingly isolated spots. How do I know James is still alive? Check your email. The call ended. I opened my email to find another video file, timestamp showing it was recorded less than an hour ago. James appeared on screen, looking worse than before. His left eye was swollen shut, and there were fresh cuts on his face. But his voice was steady when he spoke. Abby, they know about your contact with Collins. They're monitoring FBI communications. Whatever you're planning, they're ahead of you. The camera moved closer to his face. Remember what I taught you about chess? Sometimes the only way to win is to sacrifice your queen to protect the king. The video ended abruptly. I stared at the screen, trying to decode James's message. Chess had been our game during the early years of our marriage, before deployments and classified work made leisure time scarce. Sacrifice the queen to protect the king, what did that mean in this context? The communication device in my ear crackled to life. Mrs. Patterson, this is Collins. We monitored that call. They're trying to isolate you from our support. They changed the location again. Interstate 84, milepost 47. We know. We're already repositioning our teams. But Mrs. Patterson, there's something else. Airport security found chemical residue in 3 locations, but no devices. We think they're using a dispersal method that doesn't require planted bombs. My heart sank. What does that mean? It means the chemical agent might already be in place, activated remotely when they're ready. We're evacuating both locations as quietly as possible, but if they realize we're onto them, they'll trigger it immediately. That's our assessment. Which means your role at the rest stop is more critical than ever. You need to keep their attention focused on the exchange long enough for us to locate and neutralize the chemical threat. I thought about James's chess reference. In chess, sacrificing the queen was usually a desperate move, trading the most powerful piece to achieve checkmate. But in this situation, who was the queen and who was the king? Agent Collins, what if James isn't the real target? What if they've been using him to manipulate me into a specific position? A pause. What do you mean? His message about chess. What if I'm not the queen trying to save the king? What if I'm the king, and they've been positioning me where they want me for some other purpose? The implications of that thought chilled me. If I wasn't just a distracted wife trying to save her husband, but actually a key component in their larger plan, then everything I'd been told might be wrong. Mrs. Patterson, we need you to proceed to the meeting point as planned. But maintain this communication channel at all times. If something feels wrong, if anything deviates from what we've discussed, abort immediately. I looked at the clock. 3.5 hours until midnight. Time enough to drive to the Columbia River, but also time enough to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. As I prepared to leave Rachel's house, I found a note she'd left on the kitchen table. Abby, Dylan is safe. You trained me in chess too, remember? Sometimes the queen's sacrifice saves more than just the king. Be careful. Love, R. Rachel had understood more than she'd let on. She knew I wasn't just trying to save James, I was trying to save everyone he died to protect. I gathered the flash drives, put on the body armor Collins had given me, and checked the communication device one last time. As I walked to the car, I realized that everything in my life had been leading to this moment. The Navy intelligence training, the years as a military wife, the quiet strength I developed watching James face impossible choices, all of it had prepared me for a night that would either end the conspiracy or end my life. The drive to the Columbia River would take an hour and a half. Time enough to think about sacrifice, and chess, and the possibility that sometimes the most important victories require losing everything you thought you were fighting for. As I pulled out of Rachel's driveway, I caught a glimpse of Mount Hood in my rearview mirror, its peak hidden in clouds that looked like smoke in the moonlight. In less than 4 hours, I would know whether James and I had been clever enough to outmaneuver a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, or whether we had both been pawns in a game whose rules we never really understood. The drive to the Columbia River rest area took me through winding mountain roads that felt increasingly isolated as I climbed higher into the gorge. My headlights cut through patches of fog rolling off the water, and every curve seemed to take me further from civilization and deeper into whatever trap awaited at milepost 47. The communication device in my ear had been silent for the past 30 minutes, which either meant Collins and her team were maintaining radio silence or something had gone wrong with their operation. I tried not to think about which possibility was more likely. At 11:20 p.m., I reached the rest area. It was a small pull-off with picnic tables and a scenic overlook of the Columbia River, completely deserted at this hour. The parking area could hold maybe a dozen cars, but mine was the only vehicle visible. Floodlights illuminated the immediate area, but beyond their reach, the darkness seemed absolute. I parked facing the exit road, keeping the engine running as Collins had instructed. The flash drive sat in a small bag on the passenger seat, and I checked my sidearm one more time, a Glock 19 that Collins had insisted I carry despite my protests that I wasn't trained for armed confrontation. "You were Navy intelligence," she'd said. "You know how to handle a weapon. And Mrs. Patterson, if everything goes wrong tonight, that gun might be the only thing standing between you and people who have already killed to protect their secrets." At 11:45, headlights appeared on the access road. A black SUV pulled into the far end of the parking area, followed by a second vehicle, a van with tinted windows. They positioned themselves to block both potential exit routes, a detail that confirmed this was never intended to be a simple exchange. My heart hammered as figures emerged from the vehicles. 4 men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. They were clearly professionals, not the corporate mercenaries I'd imagined. One of them approached my car while the others took positions around the perimeter. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in command positions. When he got close enough for me to see his face clearly, recognition hit me like a physical blow. Deputy Director Charles Hawthorne. James's mentor, the man who'd been like family to us, walking toward my car with a pistol in his hand. I rolled down my window as he approached, trying to keep my expression neutral despite the shock. "Abigail," he said, his voice carrying the same warm tone he'd used at family barbecues. "I'm sorry it's come to this. Where's James, Charles? Your husband is safe. For now." Hawthorne glanced back toward the van. "But his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation tonight. I have what you want. The drives, all of them. Just let me see James and we can end this." Hawthorne smiled sadly. "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. You see, Abigail, your husband didn't just steal classified files. He unraveled an operation that took years to develop, one that could prevent future conflicts and save thousands of American lives." The rationalization in his voice was chilling. "By selling intelligence to foreign governments? By ensuring that no single nation has enough of an advantage to start wars they can't finish. Balance, Abigail. Your husband was always too idealistic to understand the bigger picture." One of the tactical operators spoke into his radio. "Overwatch reports movement on the ridge. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "It appears you didn't come alone after all." "I don't know what you're talking about. FBI communications are easier to monitor than you might think. Agent Collins has been feeding us her operation plans since you first contacted her." Hawthorne raised his radio. "Execute contingency plan. Now." The words hit me like ice water. Collins was compromised. The entire FBI operation was known to the conspirators. "Charles, please. Just take the drives and let us go. James and I won't say anything. We just want our family back. I know you believe that, Abigail. But your husband has seen too much, and now so have you. The Portland operation is too important to risk any loose ends." Portland operation. The chemical attack was still happening. The communication device in my ear suddenly crackled to life. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Agent Thompson, FBI counterterrorism. Collins has been compromised. We've taken her into custody and are moving to secure the airport. Can you maintain your position for 10 more minutes?" I kept my face neutral, but hope flared in my chest. The real FBI was still operational. Hawthorne continued talking, apparently unaware of the transmission. The beauty of tonight's plan, Abigail, is that it solves multiple problems simultaneously. The Portland incident will justify massive increases in domestic security spending. Your deaths here will eliminate the evidence that could compromise our other operations. And the investigation will conclude that foreign terrorists killed a CIA officer and his family to prevent exposure of their plans. He gestured toward the van. Your husband will have the honor of dying as a hero who tried to stop a terrorist attack. His sacrifice will be remembered as the ultimate act of patriotism. The van's rear doors opened, and two more operatives emerged, dragging a figure between them. Even in the dim light, I recognized James's silhouette. He was conscious but barely able to stand, his hands zip-tied behind his back. James. I started to open my car door, but Hawthorne raised his weapon. Stay in the vehicle, Abigail. We're going to do this slowly and carefully. James raised his head and looked directly at me. Even from 30 feet away, I could see him mouth a single word, run. But I couldn't run. Not with him right there, and not with thousands of people in Portland depending on whatever distraction I could provide. The drives, Abigail. Slide them out the window. I picked up the bag and hesitated. Once they had the evidence, there would be no reason to keep James or me alive. That's when I heard the distant sound of helicopters. Hawthorne heard it too, his head snapping toward the sky. Timelines accelerated. Take them both now. The tactical operators began moving toward my car, but suddenly the night lit up with spotlights from above. FBI helicopters appeared over the ridgeline, their rotors thundering across the water. Federal agents. Drop your weapons and step away from the civilians. Gunfire erupted immediately. Hawthorne dove behind a picnic table while his men took cover behind their vehicles and returned fire at the helicopters. In the chaos, I saw James break free from his captors and stumble toward the tree line. One of the operators raised his rifle to shoot him, but I floored the accelerator and rammed my car into the gunman, sending him sprawling. More gunfire shattered my windshield. I threw the car into reverse and slammed into another operative who was advancing on James's position. Through my destroyed windshield, I saw James reach the edge of the parking area and disappear into the darkness of the forest. At least one of us might survive this. The FBI helicopters had landed tactical teams on the ridge above the rest area, and I could hear them engaging Hawthorne's men in a running firefight among the trees. But Hawthorne himself was moving toward my car with grim determination, his weapon trained on me through the driver's side window. Abigail, get out of the car. Now. The Portland attack, Charles. How many people are going to die for your profit? He paused, perhaps surprised that I knew about the broader operation. Sometimes the greater good requires terrible choices. You wouldn't understand. I understand that you've forgotten what you swore to protect. I've protected this country for 30 years. I've made the hard decisions that people like you and James were too weak to make. Through my earpiece, I heard Agent Thompson's voice, airport secure. Chemical devices neutralized. All civilians evacuated safely. Relief flooded through me. Whatever else happened here, the mass casualties had been prevented. Hawthorne was still approaching, his face twisted with rage. Get out of the car, Abigail. You're going to help me get out of here. But as he reached for the door handle, a shot rang out from the forest. Hawthorne spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. James emerged from the trees, moving slowly but carrying a rifle he'd taken from one of the downed operatives. Blood streaked his face, and his hands were still zip-tied, but his aim had been true. It's over, Charles, he called out. The FBI has the airport, they have your files, and they have you. Hawthorne struggled to his feet, his weapon still in his hand. This doesn't end here, Patterson. There are others. The operation is bigger than you know. Then we'll find them too. FBI agents emerged from multiple directions, surrounding the rest area with tactical precision. Within minutes, Hawthorne and his surviving operatives were in custody. As paramedics worked on James's injuries, he gripped my hand tightly. Abby, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry I put you and Dylan through this. You saved thousands of lives, James. Dylan will be proud of his father. Agent Thompson approached us as the scene was being secured. Mrs. Patterson, your actions tonight were instrumental in preventing a major terrorist attack. The chemical devices at the airport were minutes away from activation when our teams moved in. I looked out over the Columbia River, its dark waters reflecting the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. Somewhere to the east, Dylan was safe with Rachel and my mother. Somewhere to the south, Portland was waking up to a normal day, unaware of the disaster that had been prevented. Agent Thompson, how did you know Collins was compromised? Your husband had contacted us weeks ago with concerns about FBI communications being monitored. We've been running a parallel investigation, using Collins as an unwitting source of disinformation to the conspiracy. James squeezed my hand. Chess, remember? Sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces to protect the king. But sometimes the pieces refuse to be sacrificed. As dawn broke over the Columbia River Gorge, I realized that the nightmare was finally ending. But I also understood that this kind of courage, the willingness to risk everything for people you'll never meet, was something James and I would carry with us for the rest of our lives. The FBI safe house in Portland looked nothing like the Spartan facility where I'd first met Agent Collins. This one felt more like a medical facility, with sterile white walls, monitoring equipment, and the constant presence of federal marshals who nodded politely but never relaxed their vigilance. James had been unconscious for 18 hours following emergency surgery to repair internal injuries from his captivity. The doctors assured me the damage wasn't permanent, but seeing him connected to machines and monitors made the reality of how close we'd come to losing everything feel visceral and immediate. Dylan sat beside the bed, coloring in a book Rachel had brought from home. He'd been remarkably calm about the sudden trip to visit Daddy at the special hospital, accepting our simplified explanation that Daddy had been hurt while helping catch some very bad people. Mom, when can we go home? He asked without looking up from his drawing of what appeared to be a helicopter rescuing stick figures. Soon, sweetheart. The doctors just want to make sure Daddy is completely better first. But home was complicated now. Our house in Riverside Heights was still an active crime scene, and Agent Thompson had warned us that returning to our normal lives would take time and careful security measures. Mrs. Patterson? A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Agent Thompson stood in the doorway with a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit that screamed government official. This is Deputy Attorney General Catherine Walsh. She'd like to speak with you about the ongoing investigation. I kissed Dylan's forehead and asked Rachel to stay with him while I stepped into the hallway with the officials. Walsh got straight to the point. Mrs. Patterson, in the past 48 hours, we've arrested 17 people connected to the Titan defense conspiracy. Deputy Director Hawthorne is cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence, and we've recovered over $300 million in illegal payments. That's good news, I hope. It is. But there's something else. The scope of this conspiracy extends far beyond what your husband initially uncovered. We've discovered evidence of similar operations in 6 other countries, involving weapons sales, intelligence sharing, and what appears to be systematic manipulation of international conflicts for profit. The implications made my head spin. How big is this? Big enough that your husband's investigation may have prevented not just a domestic terrorist attack, but the destabilization of allied governments worldwide. Walsh paused, glancing at Agent Thompson. Mrs. Patterson, we need your help. What kind of help? Your husband gathered the initial intelligence that cracked this open, but he was working alone, using methods that won't hold up in international courts. We need someone who understands how he pieced together the financial connections, someone who can help us trace the money trails that will bring down the entire network. I looked through the window at James, still unconscious, and Dylan, innocently coloring his pictures. Are you asking me to become some kind of investigator? We're asking you to consider a consulting role with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Your Navy intelligence background and your understanding of your husband's work make you uniquely qualified to help us unravel the rest of this conspiracy. Agent Thompson added, Mrs. Patterson, what we found in Portland was just one cell of a much larger organization. There are indications of planned attacks in London, Berlin, and Tokyo. Your work could save thousands more lives. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. What about my family? What about Dylan's safety? Witness protection protocols would remain in place for as long as necessary. But Mrs. Patterson, these people have demonstrated they'll kill anyone who threatens their operations. The only way to truly protect your family is to help us destroy the entire network. I thought about James's words from our chess games. Sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces to protect the king. But in this case, the king wasn't just our family. It was the principle that people in positions of trust shouldn't be able to sell out their countries for profit. How long would this take? Months, possibly years. The financial networks we're tracking span dozens of countries and hundreds of shell companies. But with your help, we could build cases that would dismantle the infrastructure that makes these operations possible. Through the window, I saw Dylan show his drawing to Rachel, who smiled and hugged him. Such a normal moment, made possible by people who'd risked everything to preserve normalcy for others. I need to discuss this with James when he wakes up. Of course. But Mrs. Patterson, there's one more thing. We've recovered communications suggesting that other Titan defense cells are already moving to fill the vacuum left by Hawthorne's arrest. If we don't act quickly, they'll adapt their methods and become much harder to detect. Walsh handed me a thick folder. This contains preliminary intelligence on what we believe are active operations in 3 major U.S. cities. Based on the pattern we've identified, attacks could be imminent. I opened the folder and saw surveillance photos, financial records, and communication intercepts that looked remarkably similar to what James had uncovered in Portland. The difference was scale. Where Hawthorne had been planning one attack, these new operations appeared to be coordinating simultaneous strikes. Chicago, Houston, and Miami, Thompson explained. Each targeting major transportation hubs during peak travel times. The potential casualties are enormous, I finished. When? We're not certain. But the financial transfers show large payments scheduled for completion in the next 72 hours. In our experience, that usually indicates an operation is about to go active. I closed the folder, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were asking. You want me to leave my injured husband and traumatized son to chase down terrorists I'm not trained to fight. We want you to use your skills to identify the financial patterns that will let professionals fight these terrorists, Walsh corrected. Mrs. Patterson, your husband found the needle in the haystack once. We need you to help us find it again, before more people die. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Patterson? Your husband is awake and asking for you. Relief flooded through me as I hurried back into the room. James's eyes were clear and alert, though his voice was hoarse when he spoke. Hey, beautiful. How long was I out? Long enough to scare me. I took his hand, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck. But alive, which is more than I expected 48 hours ago. He looked around the room, taking in the federal security presence. How much did they tell you? Enough to know that this isn't over. James nodded grimly. It's bigger than we thought, isn't it? Much bigger. They want me to help with the financial analysis. And what do you want? I looked at Dylan, still coloring peacefully, then back at James. I want to go home and pretend none of this ever happened. But I also can't stop thinking about all the people in airports and train stations who have no idea they might be walking into another attack. James squeezed my hand weakly. Remember our wedding vows? For better or worse, in sickness and in health? That was supposed to be about our marriage, not about fighting international conspiracies. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe protecting the life we want to build means protecting the world where that life is possible. Agent Thompson cleared his throat from the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've just received word that financial activity in the Chicago operation has accelerated. We may have less than 48 hours. I looked at James, then at Dylan, then at the folder containing evidence of planned mass casualties. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. What do you need me to do? But even as I asked the question, I realized that accepting this responsibility meant crossing a line I couldn't uncross. We would never again be just a normal family living in suburban Oregon. From now on, we would be people who knew too much, who had seen too deeply into the darkness that most people never suspected existed. James must have seen the realization on my face, because he squeezed my hand again. "Abby, you don't have to do this alone. We'll do it together." And in that moment, I understood that this was what real partnership looked like, not just sharing the good times, but standing together when the world demanded more from you than you thought you could give. The Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit occupied 3 floors of a nondescript federal building in downtown Portland, hastily converted into a command center for what officials were calling Operation Cleanup. Within 6 hours of accepting their offer, I found myself seated at a computer workstation surrounded by analysts, FBI agents, and specialists whose job descriptions I couldn't even pronounce. James had insisted on being discharged from the hospital against medical advice, arriving at the command center with his arm in a sling and a determination that worried both me and his doctors. Dylan stayed with Rachel at a secure hotel, under the protection of federal marshals who had orders to evacuate them from the city at the first sign of trouble. "Mrs. Patterson, we're going to walk you through what we've identified so far," said Agent Rebecca Martinez, a financial crime specialist who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "The good news is that your husband's initial work gave us a roadmap for recognizing the pattern. The bad news is that the remaining cells have learned from Hawthorne's mistakes." She pulled up a digital map showing the United States with red dots marking suspected Titan defense operations. Chicago, Houston, Miami, all confirmed. But we've also identified potential activities in Atlanta, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. 6 simultaneous attacks would create the kind of nationwide panic that could justify martial law in major cities. I studied the financial data flowing across multiple screens. The payment structures are different. More sophisticated shell company arrangements, smaller individual transactions to avoid detection thresholds. Exactly. They're using what we call smuffing, breaking large payments into hundreds of smaller transfers that individually appear insignificant but collectively fund major operations. James leaned over my shoulder, studying the patterns. "Abby, look at the timing intervals. See how the payments cluster around specific dates." I traced the transaction timelines with my finger. It's not random. They're coordinated with something else. Stock trading patterns, maybe? Agent Martinez nodded grimly. "We think they're short-selling airline and tourism stocks immediately before each planned attack. They're not just creating chaos, they're profiting from the market panic that follows." The cynicism was staggering. These people weren't just willing to kill thousands of innocent people, they were positioning themselves to make money from the economic disruption their attacks would cause. How much money are we talking about? Based on the Portland operation's financial footprint, we estimate each attack generates roughly $50 million in direct profits, plus hundreds of millions in subsequent government contracts for enhanced security services. I pulled up the trading data and cross-referenced it with the payment schedules. There's a pattern here. Look at this, every major payment to operational cells corresponds with options purchases that would pay out massive returns if transportation stocks collapsed. Can we use that to predict timing? Maybe. If they're following the same investment strategy. I ran calculations on the screen, tracking option expiration dates and payment schedules. Based on these patterns, the earliest attacks would be tomorrow night, during peak Friday evening travel. The latest would be Sunday morning, targeting weekend vacation travelers. Agent Thompson appeared at our workstation. "We've got developments in Chicago. Surveillance teams report unusual activity around O'Hare Airport, private contractors conducting routine maintenance on air conditioning systems in Terminal 3. My blood turned cold. Air conditioning systems. That's how they're planning to disperse the chemical agents. James stood up abruptly, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "We need to evacuate that terminal immediately. We can't evacuate without proof. A false alarm at O'Hare would create exactly the kind of panic and economic disruption they're trying to achieve. We need solid evidence before we can act." I turned back to the financial data, desperate to find something concrete. What if we follow the money in reverse? Instead of tracking payments to operational cells, what if we track equipment purchases? What kind of equipment? Chemical dispersal systems, air filtration modifications, anything that could be used to weaponize building ventilation. Those purchases would have to come from specialized suppliers. Agent Martinez began pulling up procurement databases. We can cross-reference recent purchases of industrial chemical equipment with companies that have contracts at the target airports. Within 30 minutes, we had identified 17 suspicious transactions. Companies with no previous history of chemical equipment purchases had suddenly acquired sophisticated dispensing systems. More damning, many of these companies shared the same administrative addresses, mail drops and virtual offices that existed only on paper. "This is it," James said, pointing at the screen. "Shell companies buying equipment, then subcontracting with legitimate firms that have airport access. The real companies don't even know they're being used as cover for a terrorist operation." Agent Thompson was already on his radio, coordinating with field teams. "All teams, we have probable cause. Execute search warrants at all target locations immediately." But as federal agents began raiding suspected facilities across 6 cities, my phone rang. Unknown number, which by now I recognized as never bringing good news. "Mrs. Patterson, I hope you're proud of yourself." The voice was unfamiliar, digitally distorted like the previous threatening calls. "You've cost our organization millions of dollars and years of planning. But you've also escalated this conflict to a level you're not prepared for." "Who is this?" "Someone who understands that your husband's investigation was just the beginning. Titan Defense was one subsidiary of a much larger enterprise. Eliminating our domestic operations simply means we'll focus on international markets." I gestured frantically for Agent Thompson to trace the call. "What do you want?" "We want you to understand that this isn't over. Your family will never be safe. Your son will grow up knowing that his parents painted a target on his back that will never disappear. You're finished. The FBI has your people, your equipment, your money. The FBI has arrested foot soldiers and confiscated equipment that represents less than 5% of our total resources. Mrs. Patterson, what you've discovered is the equivalent of shoplifting in a criminal empire worth billions." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with a growing sense that our victory might have been smaller than we'd realized. Agent Thompson approached with a grim expression. "Chicago and Miami teams have secured the chemical equipment and arrested the operational cells. But Houston..." He paused. "The equipment was moved yesterday. The airport contractors we identified were legitimate, they had no knowledge of any chemical modification to their work." "Meaning?" "Meaning the Houston cell adapted faster than we anticipated. They're still operational, and we have no idea where they've moved their equipment." James sank into his chair, the weight of continued danger settling over all of us. "How many people travel through Houston airports on a weekend?" "Over 100,000. I looked at the financial data still streaming across the screens, searching for any clue that might help us locate the missing equipment. But the numbers were starting to blur together, and I realized that exhaustion was affecting my ability to think clearly. That's when Dylan's drawing from the hospital room flashed through my mind. Stick figures being rescued by helicopters. Such a simple image of salvation coming from above. What if they're not targeting the airport itself? I said suddenly. What if they're targeting the airspace above it? Everyone turned to stare at me. What do you mean? Air conditioning systems disperse chemicals through enclosed spaces. But what if they've moved to aerial dispersal? Crop dusters, private aircraft, even commercial drones? Agent Martinez began pulling up aviation databases. Aircraft rental companies, agricultural services, even commercial delivery drones. If they're planning aerial dispersal over a major airport, the casualties wouldn't be limited to airport passengers, Thompson finished. It would affect the entire metropolitan area. As federal agents began coordinating with air traffic control and the FAA, I realized that our fight against this conspiracy had evolved from preventing a terrorist attack to preventing what amounted to chemical warfare against American cities. And somewhere in Houston, people with unlimited resources and no moral constraints were preparing to demonstrate just how far they were willing to go to protect their profits. The FAA command center in Houston looked like something from a disaster movie. Dozens of air traffic controllers hunched over radar screens, federal agents coordinating with military personnel, and a palpable tension that made every conversation feel urgent and clipped. I stood beside Agent Thompson and James, watching as aviation specialists tracked every aircraft within a 100-mile radius of Houston's airports. We'd been working for 6 hours straight, our eyes burning from staring at screens, surviving on coffee and determination. "There," said Commander Sarah Walsh, pointing at a radar blip that had appeared southwest of the city. Small aircraft, unscheduled flight path, flying below normal commercial altitudes. The radar operator adjusted his display. Twin-engine Cessna, registration number November 72 Charlie Fox. Filed a flight plan for crop dusting operations, but there are no agricultural contracts scheduled for that area today. Distance from Bush Intercontinental? 12 miles and closing. Current heading would take it directly over the airport's main terminal complex. Agent Thompson was already coordinating with Air Force units stationed at Ellington Field. Scramble interceptors. We need that aircraft on the ground immediately. But as military jets raced toward the suspicious Cessna, my attention was caught by something else on the financial tracking systems I'd been monitoring. "Agent Thompson, we have a problem. I'm seeing massive short positions being executed right now, billions of dollars betting against airline stocks, airport authorities, even hotel chains in Houston." James understood immediately. "They're not planning one attack. They're planning multiple simultaneous strikes across the city." "How many aircraft are we tracking?" I asked the radar operator. "In the immediate Houston area?" 47 small aircraft, 12 helicopters, and 6 commercial drones registered for various business operations. "Can you filter for aircraft that filed flight plans in the last 24 hours? The display changed, showing only recently scheduled flights. 17 aircraft appeared, scattered across the metropolitan area. Now cross-reference with aircraft rental companies that had financial transactions matching our shell company patterns. Agent Thompson was way ahead of me, pulling up the procurement databases we'd been analyzing. 7 of those aircraft were rented by companies that match our money trail. They're positioned around the entire city, airports, sports complexes, shopping centers, downtown business district. The scope of the attack was staggering. Not just one target, but a coordinated chemical assault designed to maximize casualties and economic damage across the entire Houston metropolitan area. "Commander Walsh, we need those interceptors repositioned immediately. This isn't one rogue aircraft, it's a coordinated aerial attack." Walsh began issuing orders to redirect military assets, but I could see the logistical challenge on her face. 7 aircraft scattered across a major metropolitan area, each potentially carrying enough chemical agents to kill thousands of people. "There's another problem," the radar operator said grimly. 3 of those aircraft have already begun releasing something at altitude. We're getting reports from ground observers of unusual vapor trails that aren't consistent with normal aircraft exhaust. My heart sank. We were too late to prevent the attack, now we could only try to minimize the casualties. "Emergency broadcast system," Agent Thompson ordered. "Issue immediate shelter-in-place orders for the entire Houston metropolitan area. Chemical contamination warning." As emergency alerts began broadcasting across Houston, James gripped my shoulder. "Abby, look at the financial data. The stock positions aren't just betting against Houston, they're positioned to profit from a nationwide market collapse." I pulled up the trading patterns and felt sick. They're using Houston as a proof of concept. If they can successfully execute a coordinated aerial chemical attack on a major American city, they're planning to replicate it elsewhere. Where? Based on these trading patterns: New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. They're planning to hit the 5 largest metropolitan areas in the country. Commander Walsh looked up from her communications board. "We've got F-16s engaging the lead aircraft now. But Mrs. Patterson, if they've already begun dispersal." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Chemical weapons didn't require direct impact to cause massive casualties. Even if the military shot down every aircraft, whatever they'd already released would continue affecting people on the ground. Wait, I said, studying the meteorological data on one of the screens. The wind patterns today. They're not optimal for chemical dispersal. James followed my reasoning. High-altitude winds are pushing the chemicals away from populated areas. Not away, they're being dispersed over the Gulf of Mexico. The attack is failing because of weather conditions they didn't account for. Agent Thompson was coordinating with hazmat teams on the ground. We're getting reports of minor respiratory irritation in outlying areas, but nothing like the mass casualties we'd expect from a successful chemical attack. They miscalculated, I realized. All that sophisticated planning, but they didn't properly factor in Gulf Coast weather patterns. The radar screens showed military interceptors engaging the remaining aircraft. One by one, the suspicious flights were being forced to land or, in cases where pilots refused to comply, shot down over unpopulated areas. 7 aircraft neutralized, Commander Walsh reported. All chemical dispersal appears to have been ineffective due to wind conditions carrying the agents out to sea. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this wasn't really a victory. The infrastructure that had planned and financed this attack was still intact. The people who'd orchestrated it would learn from their mistakes and try again with better planning. Agent Thompson, we need to trace the communications that coordinated this attack. 7 aircraft flying simultaneously couldn't have been managed without real-time coordination. Already on it. NSA is tracking all communications in the target area. If someone was directing these flights, we'll find them. 20 minutes later, electronic surveillance teams had identified a command center operating from an industrial facility near Houston's port complex. As federal agents surrounded the building, I watched the operation unfold through live video feeds from drones hovering overhead. Confirmed terrorist command and control facility, the field commander reported. Multiple suspects in custody. We've recovered communications equipment, chemical agent procurement records, and what appears to be targeting data for 4 additional cities. Agent Thompson turned to James and me. You were right. Houston was just the beginning. They were planning coordinated attacks on New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Washington. When? According to the operational timeline we just recovered, the other attacks were scheduled for next weekend. Same pattern, aerial chemical dispersal, coordinated market manipulation, massive profit from the resulting economic chaos. I slumped into a chair, overwhelmed by the realization of how close we'd come to a catastrophe that would have fundamentally changed American society. Successful chemical attacks on 5 major cities would have killed tens of thousands of people and created the kind of fear that could justify almost any government response. Mrs. Patterson, Commander Walsh approached with a secure phone. The President wants to speak with you. I took the phone with trembling hands, still processing the magnitude of what we just prevented. Mrs. Patterson, this is President Morrison. I want you to know that the actions you and your husband took over the past week prevented what would have been the largest terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. Thank you, Mr. President. But sir, this conspiracy extends far beyond what we've uncovered. The financial networks, the international connections, there are still people out there with the resources and motivation to try this again. I understand. Which is why I'm authorizing the creation of a joint task force specifically designed to hunt down the remaining elements of this organization. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like you and your husband to lead the financial intelligence component of that effort. I looked at James, who nodded despite the exhaustion visible on his face. Mr. President, we'll do whatever is necessary to make sure this can't happen again. As I hung up the phone, I realized that our lives had irrevocably changed. We were no longer just a CIA officer and his family living quietly in Oregon. We had become the people who knew too much, who had seen too deeply into a conspiracy that threatened the fundamental security of our country. But for the first time in a week, I felt something approaching hope. The immediate threat had been stopped, the conspiracy had been exposed, and we had the full resources of the federal government committed to hunting down anyone who might try to continue this kind of operation. Dylan would grow up in a world where his parents had helped prevent a catastrophe. And maybe, if we did our job right, he would never have to know how close he came to growing up in a very different America. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in Alexandria, Virginia, watching Dylan build elaborate Lego cities on the breakfast table while James reviewed classified briefings for the Joint Terrorism Finance Task Force. The morning routine felt almost normal, except for the discreet security team that maintained a perimeter around our house and the encrypted phones that never stopped buzzing with intelligence updates. "Mom, look." Dylan held up a complex structure with multiple towers and bridges. "It's a city that can't be knocked down. See? All the important parts are protected underground." James and I exchanged a glance. Our 8-year-old was processing the events of the past year in ways that both impressed and worried us. He understood that bad people had tried to hurt lots of families, and that his parents now had a job helping to catch those bad people. But he'd adapted to our new reality with the resilience that children somehow possess. "That's brilliant engineering, buddy," James said, ruffling Dylan's hair. "What gave you the idea?" "Agent Martinez showed me pictures of how banks keep money safe in vaults underground. I thought maybe cities could work the same way." Agent Rebecca Martinez had become more than a colleague over the past months. She was one of the few people outside our family who truly understood what we'd been through. Her visits to brief us on task force activities had become social calls as much as professional meetings. "Speaking of Agent Martinez," I said, checking my secure phone, "she's coming by this afternoon with updates on the European operations." The past 6 months had revealed the true scope of the conspiracy we'd uncovered. What started with Titan Defense had led to the discovery of similar organizations operating in 12 countries, all connected through a network of financial institutions and private military contractors that treated warfare as a business opportunity. The Joint Task Force had made over 200 arrests across 5 continents, seized nearly $2 billion in illegal assets, and prevented what intelligence estimates suggested could have been dozens of attacks similar to what was planned for Houston. But success had come with a price. Death threats against our family arrived weekly, requiring constant security measures that made normal life impossible. Dylan couldn't play in public parks without armed protection. I couldn't grocery shop without checking for surveillance. James's injuries from his captivity had healed, but the psychological weight of knowing that powerful people still wanted us dead took a toll that medical treatment couldn't address. "How are you feeling about the testimony next week?" James asked, referring to my upcoming appearance before a Senate Intelligence Committee investigating the broader implications of the conspiracy. "Nervous. Angry. Proud. All at the same time." I poured coffee and joined him at the table. "It's strange to think that 6 months ago, I was just a consultant trying to catch up on quarterly reports. You were never just anything, Abby. You were always someone who would fight for what's right when it mattered." Dylan looked up from his Legos. "Dad, when you and Mom finish catching all the bad people, can we move back to Oregon? I miss Aunt Rachel." James and I had discussed this question many times. The task force work would likely continue for years, and even after the immediate threat was neutralized, our family would always be a target for anyone seeking revenge against those who'd exposed the conspiracy. "We'll visit Aunt Rachel soon," I promised. "But our work here is important. We're helping to make sure that other families never have to go through what we did." "Like superheroes?" "Like people who care about their neighbors," James corrected gently. "Superheroes are pretend. But real people who choose to help others when it's dangerous, that's something more important." Dylan considered this seriously, then returned to his building project. "I'm going to design cities that keep families safe. When I grow up." Agent Martinez arrived that afternoon with intelligence briefings and a bottle of wine she claimed was for purely medicinal purposes. As Dylan played in his room under the watchful eye of our security detail, the 3 of us spread classified documents across the dining room table. "The good news," Martinez began, "is that we've disrupted the financial networks that made large-scale coordinated attacks possible. The bad news is that smaller cells are adapting, developing methods that are harder to detect but potentially just as dangerous." She showed us intercepted communications suggesting that former Titan defense operatives were selling their expertise to terrorist organizations and hostile governments. They're not trying to recreate the massive infrastructure we dismantled. Instead, they're teaching others how to execute smaller, more frequent attacks that would create a constant state of fear and economic uncertainty. "Death by 1,000 cuts instead of one devastating blow," James observed. Exactly. And our traditional counterterrorism methods are less effective against this distributed approach. I studied the financial patterns Martinez had identified. But they still need money, equipment, and coordination. If we can develop better algorithms for recognizing these smaller transactions. That's what we're hoping. Mrs. Patterson, your work analyzing financial flows has already helped us identify 17 potential cells across 6 countries. But we need to expand the program significantly. What does that mean for our family? Martinez hesitated. It means you'd be even more valuable targets than you already are. But it also means you'd be in the best possible position to prevent attacks that could kill thousands of people. The weight of that responsibility had become familiar over the past months, but it never got easier to carry. Agent Martinez, Dylan's voice came from the doorway. Mom says you help catch bad people too. Do you have kids? Martinez smiled. I have a daughter about your age. She lives with her father in California. Don't you miss her? Every day. But I do this work so that she can grow up in a world where she doesn't have to be afraid. Dylan nodded solemnly, then brightened. Want to see my safe city design? As Martinez admired Dylan's increasingly sophisticated Lego creations, I realized that this was what victory looked like in the real world. Not dramatic confrontations or clear endings, but the quiet, daily choice to continue fighting for a future where children could build imaginary cities instead of worrying about real dangers. That evening, after Martinez had left and Dylan was asleep, James and I sat on our back porch overlooking the Potomac River. The security floodlights illuminated our yard, but beyond their reach, the darkness felt infinite. Do you ever regret it? James asked. Getting involved in all this? I thought about the question seriously. I regret that Dylan has to grow up with bodyguards and bulletproof glass in his school. I regret that we can't visit my parents without advanced security planning. But I don't regret stopping those attacks or exposing that conspiracy. Even knowing it means we'll never have a normal life? James, what's normal? Before all this, I thought normal was suburban barbecues and school fundraisers and quiet Sunday mornings. But those things only exist because people are willing to fight for them when they're threatened. He took my hand, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while. In the distance, the lights of Washington, D.C. sparkled like stars, representing millions of people who would never know how close they'd come to losing everything they took for granted. Besides, I added, Dylan's going to grow up knowing that when the world needed his parents to be brave, we didn't run away. That's worth something. James squeezed my hand. Tomorrow, when you give that Senate testimony, you're going to help make sure this kind of conspiracy can never take root again. That's worth everything. As we headed inside, I caught a glimpse of Dylan's latest creation on the kitchen table, a Lego city with multiple levels of protection, emergency services stationed at every corner, and small figures that he'd positioned to look like they were helping each other. Maybe that was the real lesson of everything we'd been through. Not that the world was dangerous and unpredictable, but that ordinary people could choose to protect each other when it mattered most. The secure phone on the counter buzzed with another intelligence update. There was always more work to do, more threats to investigate, more people to protect. But for tonight, our family was safe, the immediate dangers had been neutralized, and a little boy was dreaming about cities where everyone looked out for everyone else. In the end, that might be the most important victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.